Another fantastic way to borrow from analogous industries is to look at ticket price. And by that I mean the typical price of the typical product or service sold in each of these industries. And as with all the other tests for analogous industries, we use it two ways. The first way is if you come up with an industry where you want to borrow an idea to bring back to your industry, use the ticket price to check, are these industries really that similar? A classic example we've seen many times is so many people these days borrow Apple or consumer electronics as a source of analogies, and then they don't check that when you bring it back in your context, you know, in the case of Apple, products are, let's call it between sort of $100 and $1,000 or $2,000, from $100 to $2,000. Now, if your industry has product or services of that weight, of that nature, then it's great. If not, maybe the analogy doesn't quite work. And the second way in which we use ticket price to get some ideas is to actually do the other way around, which is ask ourselves, what's the typical ticket price in our industry, and can we think of industries that have similar ticket prices? So typically here, just to keep it simple, at one end let's look at big ticket prices, so you know, $100,000 or more, and at the other end we're going to look at low ticket prices, let's say $100, and obviously there's a whole range in the middle. Can you see that if you have big ticket prices, more likely to be B2B, sales is probably more important than marketing, and there might be quite a fair amount of bespoking in the product. At the other end, when you're looking at low-ticket items, it's more likely to be B2C, marketing and new product development are more likely to be more important than sales, and there's some degree of product standardization. Okay, this is just to paint the landscape. Now, let's look at a couple of examples. I worked a few years ago with a number of publishers, and one of the things that publishers had is they had their analogous industry, but in their mind it was music. Everything they could see happening to them had happened to music, and when they played the game forward to themselves, they saw that publishers in the music industry, so record companies, were really suffering, and they were scared. And so the game we played is we said, can we think of industries that are relatively similar to publishing by using the ticket price, and then can we see that in these industries maybe established players had done better for themselves. And as we played around, we kind of went, okay, publishing, ticket item, let's get ticket price, let's say $15, you know, $10 to $20 to $30 maybe, that's the price of a book. We played the game of what industries have a typical of product, which is typically of that order of magnitude, and what we arrived at, toys. When you think about toys, you go, oh, okay, yeah, $5 to $50 maybe as a ticket price, so very similar to books. A very strong seasonality around Christmas and birthdays, like books. A bit less holidays, you know, books has a big spike in holidays that toys don't necessarily have. But then when you go a step further, you realize, okay, in toys, as in publishing, the traditional specialist retailers are struggling, so the small toy shops or the small bookshops. Supermarkets tend to treat both categories as loss leaders, and then there's a very successful online competitor, Amazon in the case of books, Amazon and a few others in the case of toys. And so far, the ticket price led us down the idea of this industry, so the toys industry. We then realized there's a number of other characteristics that seem to fit, and then what we arrive at is we go, but in toys, manufacturers, you know, the Hasbro, Mattel, Lego, are doing quite well. Yes, the retailers are suffering, but the manufacturers are doing quite well. And now that gives a little bit of ray of sunshine for book publishers. Now, if you work in a B2C industry, I invite you to do exactly the same, which is think, what are the other industries where the average ticket price is not that dissimilar to the one prevailing in mine? You come up with 5 or 6. Then you double check there's a few other characteristics that these analogous industries share, and then you bring it back to your industry to borrow from the successful strategies of the successful competitors. One more example before we move on. If you look at B2B, consulting. A lot of people here have worked in consulting or do work in consulting right now, and you ask yourself, okay, what's the ticket price in consulting? Well, let's say $100,000 to $1 million. Yeah, big order of magnitude, but broadly speaking, in that range you cover a lot of consulting projects. Then you ask yourself, can I think of other industries that where the ticket price is about the same? And just to unveil a little bit or lift the veil on an example we often find in live sessions, construction, house building. House, in most areas of the country, possibly not in the most expensive parts of New York or London or Tokyo, but in most areas, $500,000 is a good price. What is it that the construction industry does that makes some of its manufacturers quite successful? And here you're light on three interesting things. You can come up with lots more, but three interesting things. The first one is they offer warranty. Ooh, and then you go, okay, what is the equivalent of warranty in the consulting context? Sorry. The second thing they do is they provide showrooms. So before you build a house, or the equivalent would be before you get a project, house builders invite you to walk around a real showroom. Consultants, what's the equivalent? You work it out. And then the third thing, which is an astute one, is financing. House builders never sell a house without at least offering some ways for the customers, the buyers, whether they're B2B or B2C, or consumers or customers, to finance. Now, consultants rarely do so. Okay? So what we've done here is, by starting with the ticket price, we then identify industries that have similar ticket prices. Once we have these industries, we check a little bit more that other characteristic of these industries resonate with the industry we're in. And then the next thing we do is, what do successful people do, successful competitors do in the analogous industry? And what would the equivalent be in our industry? And this ticket price is only one of 9 ways to kind of borrow analogies from one industry to another, but it's a very effective one. Let's have a look at a few more.